Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have all of your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. Joining me today are Hayley Andrews. Welcome Hayley. Property investor, mentor, CEO of Your Freedom Empire. Have I got that right?
You did, yes.
Jolly good.
Perfect.
And John Howard, property developer, author, public speaker, owner of estate agencies and all sorts of things.
I'm glad you didn't call me an estate agent.
No, I didn't.
You normally do, and I do own estate agencies, but I don't work in them, so
Well, I realise that your knowledge is somewhat limited, so we'll leave it at that, John. Okay, anyway, right, let's get on with the questions, and Hayley, you're first. Do the experts think that before entering the buy-to-let market with the ambition of building a small portfolio, would it be wise to take an educational business course first? I hear so many stories about buy-to-let and rent-to-rent investors getting into trouble with unpaid rents and unanticipated voids cropping up.
Not necessarily a business training, but you do need to understand the industry that you're moving into. So either way, you need to SWOT up. You need to understand your responsibility as a landlord legally. You need to obviously be able to assess the deal. You need to be able to you need to be able to look at it as a business. So it wouldn't hurt, you know, if you wanted to go through business training, 100% would add benefit to you, your skill set. But you don't necessarily have to do business training in order to become a professional property investor, if that's what we want to call it here. But you do need to approach it as a professional. So you obviously need to understand tax, how it will impact you if you're only doing this part-time and you're still working. How much are you earning? How will that affect you with buy-to-let tax? What structure should you have that's most beneficial to you and what you're looking to build? So you absolutely need to approach it as a business because that's exactly what it is. But you don't necessarily have to have business training. I don't have any business training, but I own multiple businesses, but I know everything inside and out in those industries that I'm working within. So I think it's important to obviously skill up. You will pay one way or another.
I think it is a danger, isn't it? People do tend to enter the property market, particularly at the sort of lower end of things, perhaps one property or two properties, and assume that because they're going in the property market, they're going to make money.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the case.
Sometimes making money can be easy, but holding on to it's a different story, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where your business acumen comes in, I think, doesn't it?
buy-to-let is such a good way to start, especially, you know, I've got two footballers who I'm working with at the moment, and you know, they can buy a house once every 3 months or so with a large deposit. So I mean, for them, they can very quickly build up a large portfolio and don't need to do anything until they retire. And of course, they get their pension at 35, being a footballer. So, you know, they want to go into development. I said, look, just calm down. You know, you're doing so well doing what you're doing. You don't need to do anything else for the moment. But even if someone's on a you know, relatively average wage, as long as there's some inflation, some capital growth, you know, people can build up a lovely portfolio for 10 or 15 properties without any risk, and that's great if people want to do that. But it is a business, like you said, and people need to realise it's a business. Get your team together, get a good broker, you know, and get a good solicitor, and understand what you're buying, and also look for an angle, look for some discount. Don't just buy the first thing you see. You know, and also areas are so important, aren't they? You know, population, check populations. Are the populations going up or down over the next 5 years, and all the rest of it, and so on. Very important.
Well, John, we've said many times on this programme, it's about building a team around you.
Sure,
that can give
yeah,
you
and
right
a team
advice.
you can trust as well. It's very important.
Hayley, you mentioned a few things that you, don't need formal business training for, but you'd be wise to sort of understand at least. Is there a one-stop shop that you can get all this information from? Is there anywhere that you would recommend? Is it internet research? Is it online seminars? Or?
Well, there's loads of stuff out there. I mean, we actually do this as standard. So we don't just teach you property, we teach you business and how to actually effectively run that property and keep the money rather than, you know,
that's the issue,
yeah, exactly. So we always, you know, and there's many, you probably do exactly the same. So
do a little bit. I don't do a lot of it. I do a little bit.
we make sure that the structure is correct. You sit down with a financial advisor, you understand your responsibility. Are you managing the asset yourself, or are you outsourcing that? And so it really depends on how hands-on or off the investor wants to be. But regardless, you still have to understand the industry you are moving into. Even if you want to be a passive investor, it's never truly passive. You have to have some input. And you have to plan all of that up front. I wouldn't recommend anybody just jumping into it.
No.
I also think for the new investor, it's always important to think as well, are you prepared to make sometimes what are unpleasant decisions, difficult decisions?
Yeah, because
and
it's
are you hard
mentally
enough
as well.
to, yes.
So it can emotionally affect you, mentally affect you, financially affect you.
And I always say to people, are your family on board with you? Is your partner on board if you have a partner? You know, because that's so important to have that support around you, because you could be making sacrifices within the family to enable to do what you're trying to do investment-wise.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for that, Hayley. John, are there any circumstances that would allow me to withdraw from a house purchase when contracts have been exchanged?
Very simple answer to that is, if you're buying off me, no, not one. Not one. If you're buying off anyone else, there's lots. And just because you've agreed to purchase it, when you agree to purchase a property, it's subject to due diligence, subject to the solicitors, it's subject to valuation and all those other things. Now, in the best will of the world, of course, you want to use your best endeavours in order to purchase, carry on with the purchase and purchase. No one wants to pull out of a deal or even reduce the price at the last minute, Stephen, which one or two people I believe have tried to do over the years. It gets done to me on quite a few occasions, and sometimes by the most unlikely people, surprisingly.
You're looking at me.
No, not at all. But just genuinely, it does. It's amazing the amount of people who try it on. Some get away with it, some don't. So it's so important.
Got to love a trier.
God loves a trier.
If you don't ask, you don't get.
Hayley, God loves a trier. And sometimes it's for a very genuine reason.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can possibly do is carry on with a transaction if it's not for you. You know, if it's not for you, if your circumstances have changed or the deal's changed or it's downvalued, please have the balls, if you like, to say, I'm sorry, the price has either got to be reduced or I'm pulling out. And sometimes the best thing is to say, I'm pulling out. Then you'll find the agent says, this has never happened to us ever before. It's the first time everyone's ever pulled out of a deal. They're lying. It happens every day to them. But they then say to you, what would you pay sometimes? And it's an easier way of actually getting the price reduced and actually reducing it in the first place, because suddenly you're doing them a favour by sticking in the deal at a lower amount.
I think the favourite one is to send about 90% of the money, isn't it? And then see if they want to...
I've never ever done that in my life, Stephen. I suggest that's...
See if they want to send it back or not.
As if.
As if.
You've seen a lot of the modern day auctions now as well, aren't you? Which is committing people with, deposits. So and I do think something like that is needed, because although you do need to do your due diligence and things like that, the amount of deals I've had fall through this year.
Yeah.
And last year.
Well, the interesting is one agent who I deal with, who tried to say to me, well, I pay a finder's fee, like a lot of people do. Oh, I need the finder's fee paid on once you've agreed to purchase, not on completion. I said, well, that's interesting. What happens if I don't complete? I don't carry on with the deal for any reason. Oh, you get the money back. Well, please, everyone out there, do not get involved in that. You don't pay a sourcing fee or whatever you want to call it until it exchanges contracts or completes.
Yeah.
Well, basically, when it completes.
Yeah.
Any good and fair contract will have what they call the earning event, which is the point at which the money is earned, which could be exchanged, but is paid
upon completion.
On completion.
But you'd be amazed.
Or a percentage. And then on completion. I mean, I'm quite happy to pay on exchange because we're legally committed.
I mean, it's a good, you're doing someone a favour probably, they need the money maybe.
Well, the only thing is with that, Hayley, it does come back to the questioner's question, is there any way I can pull out of an exchange contract?
An exchange contract?
If they've exchanged, no.
If they've exchanged, no. If there's prior to exchange, yes. If exchanged, you've legally exchanged, no, you can't. You can try and renegotiate the deal, I suppose, on the basis that you can't complete or you don't want to complete. But of course, if you don't complete, they can keep that 10% deposit.
Yep.
But you know, do you know what? Sometimes I mean, I've been in a situation advising developers where perhaps we've had 600-700 units in one development. You know, if you get somebody who can't complete, well, let them go away. Let them go away, because what
Keep the deposit. Let them go.
You'll end up with a very bad owner who will do nothing but cause trouble for you, argue about the service charges, argue about everything.
But Stephen, also, you've got to prove a loss.
Absolutely.
You've got to prove a loss. You can't just say you know, you can probably keep the 10% deposit, but you can't sue them for the rest until you prove a loss, and you can't prove a loss until you resell it. And then they can argue, well, you didn't bother to sell it for the full money, so it's very hard.
And that can also cause a hiccup in the process of purchasing, because the new purchaser comes along and says, oh, you've got this legal dispute on the contract.
We need to take Hayley's advice and find a compromise.
Well, there we go. On that note, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Hayley Andrews and John Howard. Welcome back. Hayley, your second question. With the government seemingly discouraging the smaller buy-to-let investor, is it still an attractive proposition for the amateur landlord? It would seem from what I read that tax laws and rental legislation changes and recommendations are against the smaller business. What do you think?
Well, I think the key is in the word amateur, isn't it? I mean, the very definition of amateur is lack of skill or dabbling in something for fun or leisure, in which case you're not treating it as a business, it's not acting in a professional manner. I think that's what they're trying to stamp out.
I think they also call them accidental landlords,
Yeah,
aren't they?
well, you get, I mean, I did it myself. So I had my own house, and then rather than sell that house, I moved into another house, a bigger house, and put that property on a buy-to-let mortgage and put a tenant in there. So I did that as well. So I was an accidental landlord, an accidental estate agent, an accidental management agent.
You did all right at it, didn't you?
I did
accidental.
But I think that's because I approach things professionally. So I look at, I make sure that I understand any industry I'm moving into. So I treat everything as a business and approach it as a professional, and I think that's what the government is very much encouraging. They're not necessarily discouraging smaller landlords, they're just making it there's a lot of red tape, and there's a lot of red tape for a reason. This is people's homes, people's lives, and we need to treat it as a profession. I think there's a lot of accidental landlords, a lot of people that are playing in property that perhaps don't understand their responsibility, and that's what the government is trying to stamp out with, buy-to-let tax and things like that, with the new model tenancy and legislation and recommendations around pets. They're trying to create a professional arena.
But don't you think, Hayley, that, I mean, it's all right, I understand, there is a new modern tenant, there's a new modern landlord, if you like, and I understand that, and there are all these apps. I'm involved in an app where, that you can rent a property on it, you can find a builder and all of it. It's all changing, the whole thing is changing. The one thing I would, and probably for the better, to be honest, because in the old days, and you remember those days, there were some pretty dodgy, wealthy, dodgy landlords who wouldn't even knock on a tenant's door, they'd just open the door up. Oh, have I caught you half your clothes on? I'm so sorry, and all that. It was dreadful. And now you've stopped doing that. I'm pleased.
Yes, I have.
So, where was I? So it is important that things are improved and the standards are higher, and people's homes are better now, and the tenants at homes are better. But also, the other reason that they've sort of got tough with all this is because people weren't paying their tax. And they want everyone to have a limited company, so there's an annual return. So, you and I have been paying our taxes in limited companies forevermore. But, how annoying is it to know that someone owns a property in their own name, hasn't paid the tax on it as a second home or whatever you want to call it, It's so annoying, and it means the rest of us pay more tax. So I'm pleased the government have done what they've done. And I think, we've looked at it 2 different ways. You've looked at it from the point of the standards and the qualities and the professionalism, which is absolutely right. And I see it from a tax point of view. It's only right that everyone should pay their tax.
Well, I think the taxation point of view is very, very important. But I also think, you know, lending has become more sophisticated.
Yes.
Tax collection has become more sophisticated. So the whole industry must move along at that pace.
Yeah.
You can't have something lagging behind.
No, it's a good
You can't have the guy renting out his house and just putting the cash in his pocket. You know, you mentioned money laundering earlier.
Yeah.
Well, again, an estate agent now it is bound to report to the government somebody coming in trying to rent a property for a handful of cash, you know, to either to avoid references or get rid of black money, you know. So I think overall I'm against an interventionist government, but I think overall I think this industry has to be smartened up.
It's painful, but it's painful, especially for the older landlords.
Yeah.
It's painful for the young, you know, modern entrepreneur landlords. They think it's, you know, normal, if you like.
I mean, I actually welcome legislation. It gives us guidelines to follow.
Yes.
We understand what we can and can't do, and we can, you know, use that to our advantage.
Yeah.
So I welcome it, and I do think that there are a lot of rogue landlords out there that really do need to be stamped out, and this will do that.
I agree entirely with you. Yeah.
I also think the unfortunate part is that where people do suffer very badly from bad landlords, the trouble is they're at a social level or status that's not conducive to be able to complain about
No,
it.
I think, and that's very sad.
They don't know where to go.
No.
They don't know who to complain to, and suffer for it very, very
Yeah,
badly.
they do.
Yeah. And I mean, you're probably the same. Some of the properties I view, even you know, today, a couple of weeks ago,
Aren't great, are they?
and you know, I'm horrified that they are being rented out, obviously illegally, you know, and so there's still people that get under that radar.
But
So
I think there
it's
always will be,
becoming more
Hayley,
and more difficult.
Hopefully, it'll
but
be harder and harder to do so. Hopefully.
yeah.
Well, let's hope so. All right, John, your second question. Can the experts please confirm what power the surveyors have when they make safety recommendations under the new EWS1 form regs? There have been articles in the press that suggest that on the same building, one surveyor has been satisfied that the building meets safety requirements and another found the specification inadequate. Are the recommendations made by surveyors mandatory to be fixed, or is there a body who arbitrates in such cases of disagreement?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting point, this, and they have gone cladding balmy, if you like, and we've got a PD scheme. It's 4 stories, 3 stories high. It's got no cladding on it whatsoever, and constantly we've been asked for these certificates to say that the cladding's safe. Well, there isn't any cladding on it, but the surveyors are so obsessed. You know, we say to the solicitors, look, this is it. You've had confirmation. From a surveyor. There's no cladding required. Oh well, you know, where is the form? Well, you don't need one. So they are absolutely obsessed with it. What I would say is, a surveyor that knows his job, and clearly some of the ones who are going around to value these properties don't. A surveyor that knows his job will have the confidence to either say it passes or say it doesn't pass. Ultimately, the local authority are the ones that will serve a notice on the building to say if it's safe or not, and the fire officer has a big part to play, huge part to play in this. The fire officers do. So what the government are doing is absolutely right. They're making sure these buildings are fire safe. I think they've gone a bit fire balmy. I mean, one new block I've done recently, we weren't allowed a desk in the foyer. We weren't allowed anything in the foyer whatsoever, not even a plant, which is going a bit crazy. But I can understand why they've gone too much the other way, if you like, because there are blocks which need to be sorted out, have not been sorted out yet, but it is a massive, and the government have been criticised for it, but it is a massive, massive problem. It's a huge problem. And now, surprise, surprise, any new developer who's going to build a high-rise block, and high-rise, by the way, is over 6 stories, technically, is going to have to pay a levy. Why are we going to pay a levy?
For retrospective
Because
works,
we've
I
done it
suppose.
right in the past.
Yeah.
We're now going to have to pay a levy. It's crazy to point, to punish developers who have done nothing wrong.
Yeah, I think these EWS1 forms, it's a little bit like, John, I can't remember the name or reference number of them, but if you remember, like 12, 15 years ago, we suddenly had these forms we had to fill in for mortgage purposes.
Yeah, we did. I can't remember
And you had to say it's not a sub-sale, it's not this.
Absolutely. It's not this, it's not that, it's not the other.
And everybody was getting really obsessed with those at the
They
time.
were, yeah.
Now it's just a matter of course, you do it as part of your tick list, don't you? And I think this will settle down to be that. But I mean, certainly in the building I'm in, you know, they've come along and said, yeah, well, the cladding's fine, but the wooden decking on the balconies is not. And it's millions of pounds.
It's millions of pounds. I mean, I'm actually getting involved in I think I can say so, a tower block where all the cladding's fallen off. I've got to redo the whole cladding. And the other issue is fire breaks. So a lot of the cladding is fine, but they haven't put the fire breaks in because they didn't need to when it was built. And the fire breaks slot in between the floors. It's not a massive job to do, but the problem is you need to scaffold it. So scaffolding is a fortune. And the development I recently did, the scaffolding was over £1 million. Just the scaffolding.
Well, I know, again, I worked on a building down here, did some consulting for them, and you know how they have this floor-to-window sealant that expands and contracts with heat. When you get up to 30 or 40 stories, you get movement on the building.
You do.
And these joints were just breaking apart and leaving a gap down to the next apartment down. And again, that's a huge fire hazard, as we now know it.
Yeah,
so
huge fire
very
hazard.
difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you'd cater for sort of remedial work with that sort of
Well,
thing.
it's so expensive. As soon as you scaffold a block, I mean, you may be able to do it off a hoist, to be fair. But I mean, I don't fancy being 30 stories up on a hoist. Do you?
No. If they don't agree with the surveyor, can they go to a chartered fire engineer?
Yes, they would be able to. But I mean, it's such a battle when you're trying to sell a property. In retrospect, we were better off to get to get a proper survey done showing it hasn't got one.
Yeah.
But of course, we didn't think we needed to because we knew it didn't have any cladding on it in the first place. It's bonkers, absolutely bonkers.
But again, I don't think the government have been terribly decisive about it all, have they?
I think it's, you know, I know I defend the government quite often on these shows, but actually it's very hard. I mean, you know, who is at fault? Is the fire officer at fault? He has to give a certificate, or she gives a certificate once a year on these buildings, sort of. Is the local authority at fault? Well, you know, not really, probably, because the building regs at the time were right. Is the developer at fault? Well, not really, because at the time they did everything right, probably. There's a few rogue ones, but I mean, on the whole, no one's done anything wrong. It's just times have changed, and more experience and more knowledge means that
but
they
again,
want higher standards.
I think on one of the catastrophes that we had, the specification of the cladding was misrepresented, wasn't it? The wrong assignment numbers were put to it. So whose fault is that? Obviously, it goes back more towards the manufacturer.
Well, I also think the building inspector is, you know,
but if you have a product put in front of you with a detailed specification with a reference number, are you entitled to accept that as being?
Well, I'd have thought you should check.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, that our lives
Happy
are getting
note.
Happy note.
that our lives are getting safer.
Nice to finish on a happy note, isn't it?
Okay, so big thank you to Hayley Andrews and John Howard. Thank you very much for your contribution. Great stuff. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.